Hey, Push Students, Mr. Naimatsu coming in with your Khan Academy regarding Reconstruction Part 1. So, we have Part 1 and Part 2. All right, Civil War is done. So, that was a quick beginning and a quick end. And we're moving on. So, we're on to Reconstruction. So, Reconstruction is about how to build back now the South. And obviously, since the Union has won, General Lee has surrendered, the Republican North is victorious. How and which are we going to rebuild the South, and how are we going to ensure the main goal of the Civil War, which is end slavery, is going to be ended, and we're going to ensure it's going to end in the South. And slavery does end. However, as it's very clearly said, and especially in the 13th Amendment, slavery is illegal, but racism through segregation continues. So segregation is going to continue, and the racism and the racial notions that support segregation are going to continue. And although segregation has ended, obviously we can argue that the racism, and especially structural racism, is still something that exists today. And those roots are found here in Reconstruction. So let's get into this, guys. A lot of application of what's going on today. So first thing, after Reconstruction, Congress now. Remember, Congress that's largely full of Republicans. The same Congress now that is all Republicans, because when you succeeded from the South, you didn't have right to representation in the Senate, right? You're no longer part of the United States. So a Republican North sectional victorious Congress is going to be forcing a series of things that the South is going to do. And I'm just going to take this back a little bit and talk a little bit more history. There's this thing called amnesty, which is to give forgiveness. And Lincoln and his successor, Johnson, is going to go through two similar experiences where they're going to go to the South and saying, okay, you guys lost, like you need to, go ahead and pledge an oath back to the United States. And this one time, like they're looking for like 90%, and they don't even get like 2 or 3. And eventually, I think they passed like a law where only 10% of like Confederate members actually basically take an oath back to the United States. 90% of the population never really says, yeah, we lost, and yeah, we are still back, and talking comparatively today, this is why a lot of states at certain levels and a lot of Southern culture, and again, this is not all of the South, but some parts of the South, this is why Confederate flags still flew over the Capitol, because yeah, they surrendered, but they didn't really agree or confirm their culture to what the goals of the actual Civil War was. So we have this kind of contradiction that the Union and the North won, but the South, despite losing, does not really accept the way of life that the North is going to be literally enforcing through guns, through occupation on the South. And this resistance to the South, a resistance to the North that the Southerners have, a feeling that Northern troops who belong in Massachusetts, belong in New York, are in the heart of the South, in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia, and dictating to state legislatures and to normal people how they should socially live now with free African Americans is going to be a pill too hard to swallow for many Southerners. And so we can see this continual racial superiority attitude that continues. It never really gets addressed by the Northern groups. There's multiple times. In fact, the Republican Congress is just going to walk away after the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, and I hope that works out. But unfortunately, states do not at certain levels enforce those, and the Supreme Court at a federal level is actually going to support the right of states to not do those. And so we have kind of a state and a federal system in which is continuing racism. It may have ended slavery, and we may have it. This war did end slavery, so yes, we did, but it did not end the structural and overt racism and segregation laws that will continue in the 1860s, and the racism that at level still pervades our society today. The Black Codes were a series of codes, started really in the heart of the South, which is Mississippi, and kind of spread elsewhere. But these are economic and political ways to ensure systems of slavery still continue. One would be an example of like contracts. Like you couldn't be able to work, you'd have to have a contract, and that contract would have to be at least a year, right? So basically you are signing a deal that you have to be a worker for somebody for a year. I mean, it's starting to sound like slavery for a year, There's a lot of tenant and sharecropping that was done back then, which is basically, well, now that you're a free African American, sure, you can go ahead and have a farm and you can grow, but nearly half to 90% of the stuff that you make goes back to me. So, you're only getting half to 10% of the stuff that you're actually making yourself as a farmer. You can see that economically that these codes basically enforced a system of diluted slavery at certain levels, right? And maybe not an overt slavery, but definitely an economic system that is now allowing African Americans, free African Americans, the same economic equality, the same amount of economic justices. And again, I'm going to say this, that is probably still, it comes down to the South. We historically know that African Americans, despite their initial push for education and family and church, are going to talk about that in the life of slaves, life after slavery, for free African Americans, like there's a big push towards education. Some of these systemic barriers towards education have still continued, and they really have limited the African American community's progress, and other people of color, as we know. So the Black Codes were not only an economic system, but they were also a political system. I think I had mentioned earlier, that they began passing these things called poll taxes, in which if you're an African, if you're anybody, you have to pay a tax just to vote. And many African Americans are poor, not doing it. They have overt ones where you can't be in the jury still. So, they're just not being treated as equal citizens, again, despite the passage of 13th, 14th, and 15th. And some of you guys are saying, well, what is the 13th, 14th, 15th? We're not there. Yeah, you'll be getting those in our next one and get more details about those amendments. Because of this view of the Union being in, the Southern way of life has just gotten sonic slapped, right? They lost something that they thought they could easily win. Their way of life that they had fought for, they argued was their way of life, both economically and socially, a system that was based on slavery, has just been thrown out the window as well. And you have Union troops that are living in your homes, living in your towns, because your state legislator has yet to pass the 13th, 14th, 5th Amendment, or your ex-Confederate troops have yet to sign an oath of loyalty back to the United States. You're still, even though you guys have formally surrendered, the South formally surrendered, the Union troops have to be there because they're just not acting it, right? They're bringing up these Black Codes, right? They are not saying that they apologize for their actions. Maybe the general signed this surrender, but not the individual people in Mississippi and otherwise. So out of this system of chaos and frustration, the KKK comes in, and the KKK was largely seen as a kind of loose group of individuals, not only ensuring obviously white superiority, but at certain levels, I believe if you look at it, it's kind of a defense towards the Union troops. And in Wikipedia, talking about the finding of the first Klan, the first people that are shown that are being lynched here are not necessarily African Americans. These are individuals that came from the North, known as scallywags or carpetbaggers, that were coming down to ensure that they brought in their Northern attitudes about freedom to ensure that African Americans were getting it, and also they probably came down because now they thought maybe there's an advantage to take the land, because maybe rich individuals who relied on slavery really as an economic source maybe didn't have that as much. So there's multiple reasons why carpetbaggers and scalawags came down, but just to note that they're first, this shows a cartoon threatening the KKK that they will hang white people that support it. So really, the KKK definitely has its focus. It has its focus on slavery and African Americans and white superiority, definitely. But it's also a reaction to kind of a protection, a gang of men that want to protect their homes and their community from what they see as an occupying force of the North and the Union. Another group that comes out of this that has incredible political kind of influence today is the NRA, right? And the National Rifle Association, the NRA, comes out this time to really ensure that individual Southern members have the right to bear arms to protect themselves from Union troops, right? This idea of protecting yourself from a federal government that may be invasive. In this case, they felt that was true. So this kind of a couple of historic roots that are coming out of this kind of chaotic environment in which the Union troops are stationed in the South. And one of them being the KKK. And we'll talk more about them. They will go up they'll kind of come down, and then they'll have a massive resurgence in the 1920s, to which I think they have never really fell back from. And one thing I want to show you again to kind of exemplify this attitude is, what's called the Freedmen's Bureau. And this is a political cartoon. I believe this general, I forgot what his general was, but anyways, yeah, I think this actually is in the Khan Academy that you're going to see. But as you can see, it's literally a federal government representing not the Confederate flag, but the Union flag, stepping in, trying to force, and silence these individuals to accept African Americans as equals, right? And that's the whole idea here, is that the union's job at certain levels is try to force this social and cultural change that had been just ingrained with them in generation after generation, and it just didn't happen. And multiple attempts, eventually the Republicans in the Northern, they're going to withdraw. And even though they had not reached some of the, I think, socially society transforming goals that it wanted, had not getting realized, right? We know that segregation and racism are going to continue, especially in the South, where these institutions and this racial superiority has been given, like I said, from generation to generation. All right, so that's kind of a little review of the Reconstruction. We'll get into the Reconstruction amendments, the next one, which is the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. But this is kind of focusing on some groups from the Union, from the South, from African Americans, to Congress passing acts and getting financial support, such as the Freedmen's Bureau, just to go ahead and have you guys an idea of how these individuals react when the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment will come in. But yeah, this is kind of the story. The story of Reconstruction is like, the Union tried. It tried real hard, but it did not succeed. It ended slavery, but did not end racial segregation nor racism, right? And these are still two things that we're new, and at certain levels, racial segregation, I think, exists in different forms today. So cool. All right, guys. Well, not so cool, but, we're done with the string test. So cool for you. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you next time, Pushers. Take care.